All right. How are we doing today, friends? I hope your Friday's going really well. And today we're just going to jump in and we're going to do a little bit of Q&A on rentals. This is just something that questions that have come across in the course of doing some house hacker content for my podcast. And so right in line with that is rentals, right? So let's get over here. All right. A little bit of Q&A. All right. So the first question is, let me bring them up. Sorry, technology's fun. All right, first question is, should I get or should I target fixer-uppers or turnkey rental properties? And if you're having any trouble hearing me or seeing me, please let me know, of course. And this is a really good question, right? Fixer-uppers versus turnkey. These are two very different things, unfortunately. So it's going to be like one of those it depends questions. So with a fixer, you're obviously going to be targeting something with equity, and that's kind of the upside, as you're kind of looking for like a 70% all-in equity, as opposed to a turnkey. And a turnkey is basically a flip. So a turnkey provider flips the property, sells it to you for basically full price. So you're going to have pretty much zero equity in that property. And that's okay for some investors. That's totally fine because then there's the trade-off. The fixer, you obviously have the rehab and you have the management and you have the cost, you have all of that. Whereas a turnkey, you basically are going into something with no maintenance because it is a flip. They've gone through the systems, you've done your inspection. It's basically a fully fixed up property, and you're paying full price for it, which is the problem for some investors. And for some, it's fine. They just want something that cash flows from minute one, and that they don't have to, uh, they don't have to manage that rehab. They don't have to put out rehab funds. They could put a tenant in it on day one, or a lot of turnkey providers do put in a tenant for you. And so when you buy the property, it's basically you have a vetted tenant in it and it's cash flowing on day one. Whereas a fixer property, you're talking about a month or two to fix, and then from there, you have to go through the entire process of renting it. Either your property management company then goes through the process of vetting tenants, advertising, going through applications, picking the right one. They move in a week or two later, maybe even up to 3 weeks. Then you start cash flowing. So you've been holding the property for, let's just say, 2 or 3 months before it starts cash flowing versus turnkey is more hands off. It's literally people who just have money that want to park it into these things and it cash flows from day one. The problem is that they don't really have any equity. You can't do a lot of burr type deals with turnkey unless you're sitting there and you're just waiting for things to appreciate. So if that's you, that's fine. There's a lot of turnkey operators who do just fine. They are selling houses every single day, and there's the right kind of investor who want that turnkey product versus an investor like me who are looking for those rehab upsides and creating forced equity, being able to burr properties. That's where the fixers obviously come in a lot more. Next, cash flow versus appreciation. Oh boy, this is like this is a pretty basic question, but it's not, and it's another kind of like it depends type question because, um, my friend Nick, he was always going after appreciation, whereas I was trying to target cash flow from day one. There's just two very different types of investing. Um, in an appreciation market, obviously, you have a really good long-term play. Your cash flow is usually sacrificed in return for longer term gains. And those long-term gains could be refinancing out of those properties, um, selling them, holding them for 10 years and then selling them. That's definitely a play. You could leverage that equity. So these are higher equity over the long term. So you can leverage that equity. You can borrow against it. That's a huge benefit for most investors. Uh, Whereas in a cash flow play, you are just looking for that money every single month. You're going to have lower equity. And it won't be forced equity. It'll just be the money that you're basically paying off every single month. And then, so borrowing against these is a lot harder in that first 2, 3, 4, 5 years because the market's not really going up on your cash flow properties. You are capturing more cash flow every single month, but you're not building in that long-term equity like an appreciation play is. And so it's one of those things where I'm targeting cash flow because over time I will realize the returns on, a 20-year investment will appreciate for the most part. And so I'm not too worried about that. But it's not going to appreciate like Denver or San Francisco or Boston, any of those places where I could in 5 years, have 50% more equity in that property. It would take a lot longer on in a cash flow market. But in a cash flow market, there's a lot more upsides for building in that cash flow, maximizing that cash flow, and also um, buying deeper discounts, buying fixer uppers, burring those properties, and maximizing the cash flow. You are looking for just a bigger number every single month versus, um, over here you might be making $200 a door on your properties, and that's a thin margin. That's that's really thin. Where over here, you might be looking at 500 to 2,000, depending on the property, what you can do with it. You might be looking at a lot more cash flow if typically like a cash flow market wouldn't have as many restrictions on short-term rentals, things like that, versus here in Denver we have a lot of restrictions on short-term rentals, so we can't maximize that cash flow. I would have to be okay with this really small deal here of $200 a month. Now, is it appreciating more than the difference between these two numbers? Yes, but that money's locked away until I either borrow against it, refinance, or I go ahead and I sell. And so capturing that equity becomes the problem there. Um, Next question is pretty simple, but it is something that comes up quite often. So we're talking about Q&A on rentals, guys. Thanks for coming and joining us. And uh, just a few questions that have come up in our community here on different rentals. So this applies to house hackers. This applies to my my long-term clients, etc. So 1% rule. Like, what is the 50% rule? What's the 1% rule? What's the 70% rule? The 1% rule when it comes to rentals is pretty simple. So if I have a $200,000 property, I want it to rent for $2,000 per month. So this is the cost of the property. This is the 1% rule, is 1% of the monthly income of the purchase price. And so the reason why this is a pretty big target, I mean, it depends on who you talk to, of course. But a lot of people talk about the 1% rule. If you're doing like DSCR lending, anything like that, they want to see at least that much. And so this is just a really good number to be able to cover your expenses, your mortgage, your insurance, your taxes, and still come out ahead on saving up for some maintenance, deferred maintenance, and then having some cash flow. If you're it's just kind of a rule of thumb. There's no hard and fast rule unless you're getting a lending type that absolutely is requiring a 1% deal. Here in Denver, We're typically seeing like 0.75%. And that's what we're seeing in this kind of high appreciation, lower cash flow market. Whereas our markets in Ohio are seeing about 1.2 to 1.5%. And obviously, the higher, the better. There's people picking up 4% deals, in certain markets. At least they were. I don't know. If you know that market, please let me know, of course. But um, but the higher percentage, the better. So typically, like 1% is the lowest that most people will go. And if you're going lower than that, you better hope that you're in an appreciation market. So you're making up for that lower cash flow in a different way. So it really ties into that first question as well. All right, what's up, guys? Thanks for joining in. All right, this is kind of a longer question. So I tried to write it out here, but it's basically, oh, where did it go? Okay, yeah. So would the cost of hiring a property manager be offset by the time saved and expertise gained, especially for a multi-state investor? Oh boy, this is kind of, it's going to depend on each investor. I know guys who can self-manage out of state like a boss, like they can just do it themselves. People like me, I want to have management in place because I don't want to deal with those headaches of long-term investment. So if you're talking about a typical, let's just say it's a $2,000 a month rental, and your management company is taking 10%, so you're paying $200 per month, right? And so over the course of a year, that is going to be um, $200 a month. You're talking about $2,400 per year. So you're basically paying um, $2,400 a year for all of the things that property management does, right? And that should include, vetting tenants, advertising. They are taking those calls for repairs. They're setting up vendors for those repairs, and they are all the property management stuff on a day-to-day basis, so that you're just basically getting a report at the end of the month, right? So they're taking on pretty much all the load of that property so that you have the time to do. Now, I don't know the actual statistic on how much time a normal, rental would take, you as the operator to self-manage. Let's just say it's I don't know. I'm going to shoot high here. I'm going to be the opposite of conservative here. So let's just say it takes 10 hours per month. And that is high, of course, right? So at 10 hours per month, you're basically being paid $200, or you're saving $200 in order to work those 10 hours. Now you can break this down any way you want. If it only takes you 5 hours, realistically, it should probably only take you 1 or 2 hours of kind of actual brain power if there aren't any major renovations, if you're not having a tenant turnover, uh, anything like small repairs, setting up vendors, making sure that you have the payment in the, from the tenant, those things. Let's just say it's even 2 hours, right? So at 2 hours, you're making $100 an hour, or you're saving, oh, excuse me, that's a percent. You are saving $100 per hour, right? And you're working 2 hours, you're saving $100 per hour there. That might make sense to you, right? Um, the ten hours, if you're, let's say there's a tenant turnover, you have contractors that you're trying to schedule, you have, a kind of a major rehab going through here. Um, if you're looking at anything more than like 2 or 3 hours, you're not saving enough money for it to be worth it. Yep, exactly. Yep. This This West is best. I like your name. So yeah, depends on how well it's fixed up and the kind of tenants you have. I've had some that have been 10, yep, 15 to 60 minutes per month, and some with daily calls. Um, that's a really, really good point, and I'm glad that you added that in because it will vary month by month, right? You can't just budget, oh, this is only going to be an hour a month until that 1 month hits where you have the daily calls. You might be working an hour a day on this thing, right? And so you just have to really uh, budget your time. If you are, if you are really, uh, if you have a ton of time and you don't have a lot of money and you want to capture that extra $200 a month on that cash flow, then you absolutely are okay with taking the time and go ahead and uh, self-managing it, getting that experience and expertise, kind of figuring out what you do and you don't like about property management, about that side of the business, what you want to see from your property management. Some people learn just hands-on. They just go, I never want to vet tenants again. And it is worth it to pay $200 for, for the company to go ahead and do that for me, right? The problem comes when you start getting 5, 6, 7, 10 rentals. If you're self-managing, yeah, you're saving a ton of money, right? You're saving, let's just say, 10, uh, 10, 10 rentals. You're definitely talking about a lot of money. You're talking about $2,000 a month that you're saving in property management fees, all things being equal. But that could be 10 times the time that you're talking about. This West is Best is talking about 60 minutes a month times 10. That's not too bad. 10 hours a month, self-management on 10 properties. That's doable. Hey, welcome REI Focused. That is doable. If you have daily calls on even half of those rentals, you are going to wish that you had something else set up, honestly. So it's one of those things where the cost savings may not be worth the experience gained. And especially if you're a multi-state investor, it kind of it exacerbates the problems when you're in one state and you're trying to manage people in a different state. It's just from experience, when it comes to acquisitions, rehab, property management, managing agents, even just touring properties, finding deals, all of those things get exacerbated when it's multi-state. So I would recommend going to property management at that point, because this $200 a month, you just have to evaluate how much you're worth, right? At 10 hours, making $20 an hour to manage your own property, it may be worth it to outsource that. All right, I believe this is the last question. So thanks for joining me on a Friday. Welcome Bailey, welcome Matt, welcome Lino. So what is the realistic vacancy rate for that property? This is a very general question for something that is just extremely hyper specific to your area. So the first thing I would do is look up vacancy rate for your market. And I try to look up vacancy rate for the type of property that it is as well. So vacancy rate, Dayton, Ohio, single family properties for something that's current. So like for this month, or for last month, it'll be a month behind. Then you can kind of get an idea of what other agents and landlords are reporting. And it's going to depend on the type of investment too. So I believe that this was kind of a midterm rental question. So on LTR, there's data out there. There's, just Google it. And this is where networking comes into play too. You can ask friends who have rentals in your area and figure out what they're seeing for vacancy. If they have things that are filling up really fast, that's pretty common for your area. I've had the last probably 4 or 5 months just through my networking meetup here in Denver, I have seen more complaints about properties taking longer to fill. So they're not filling within a week and then they're boom back rented. The demand has gone down just a tiny bit, and it could be also just seasonal through the winter. But on midterm, I would check with places like Furnished Finder, and the other places where you can do midterm rentals, like Airbnb and Verbo, to get some data on what they're seeing the most recent for vacancies. And then obviously on short term, this would be pretty similar. The data on short term is pretty easy to get. You can kind of see how fast properties are filling up either through Airbnb, Verbo, through AirDNA. There's some other resources out there that kind of compile some of that data and say you should be seeing X amount of vacancy per time of year, which is kind of cool. We don't see that a lot with long-term rentals. So they'll show you like, when the really, high and hot seasons are and when you can expect lower vacancy, which is pretty cool. So realistic vacancy rate, it changes every single quarter. So we've been pretty spoiled for the last like 3 or 4 years where vacancy rate has been nearly non-existent. It's been like less than 2% or something like that, or less than 5%. It'll probably creep back up to a more sustainable 7%, 10%. You might be looking at a month of vacancy per year for a long-term rental, which we have not seen in a long time. So anyways, thanks for joining me inside here, and um, here on this Friday, spending a little bit of time with me to go over some rental Q&A. Again, my name is Anson Young, and this is part of, I'm streaming here on YouTube. I am streaming here on Instagram as well. And this West is best. So great tip is to set up your long-term leases to end when the busy season for people moving here is. Yes. Ideally, you look for tenants in the spring when most people want to move. That's a really good point. Some of the people who I were talking to who were complaining about, softer rentals was people who were trying to rent, right in the dead of January. And that's not a great time. Right now, early March, we're starting to see, kind of the spring is thawing out the market as it does on a yearly basis here. And so that's a really good point. So having your leases end, have them always end in April or May. That way, when turnover's coming, I would say maybe April, and then turnover, you would say like April to May is when you're trying to fill that property versus June, when summer's starting to hit. So that's a great point. This West is best. Thank you for that. I totally agree with that. I think that's perfect. So with that amazing advice from my friend Wes is best. Thanks for joining us, and we'll definitely see you next time. PropertySquadHQ.com is where these questions came in from, and we'll see you next time. So thanks for joining us. Maybe. There we go.